I love food. That shouldn't be a question or a moment of anyone to give anyone pause that I don't really love food. I love to cook. I love to bake. I love to give food away to people. The best years of my life, honestly, were living in a college dorm with 71 other women because I would make things. I would bake apple muffins, apple bread, muffins of all kinds of other sorts. I would cook dinner, and then there were 71 other people that I could just give things to. Right, or was very well known when I was in college across the entire campus as the challah girl, because I had this challah recipe that I was obsessed with. But every time you made this challah recipe, it made 6 giant loaves of challah. And so I would just give it to people, right? I'd walk into class and hand people loaves of bread because it made my soul feel really good. It made me really feel connected to the nourishing parts of people's lives. Right? It made me feel like I was taking all of these different ingredients that don't look a whole lot like anything, right? What do you really do with flour? What do you really do with yeast? What do you really do with water and eggs and honey? All of these things together may or may not be delicious on their own. But when you put them all together and you see what they can do, the way that they change, the way that they turn it into something delicious, the way that they come together and they use all of the best parts of who they are to create something that would not be the same if there was not a part in it, right? So if you're making challah, if you don't use the right amount of eggs, your challah is not. Your challah is sad and gross and not bound together well, and it has a weird texture to it. Just like if you use yeast for any kind of bread, I know a lot of you have dipped your toes into the bread making extravaganza whilst in quarantine. If your yeast is not good or you do not use your yeast properly, it goes right, and your dough does not rise. Or when I first started this quarantine on the sourdough train, my mom gave me a starter, and that was the first starter I got. And I used her starter to make sourdough, and I assumed that there was yeast in the starter. There was no yeast in the starter, and so my bread was very flat, right? It tasted pretty good, but it was very flat. It got to be like that. And all of a sudden, I had a new concept of what the Israelites must have experienced when they were trying to make bread to leave Egypt. But it is beautiful. I think there is a holy and sacred work in cooking and feeding people. I think that there's holy and sacred work about coming to the table with people. I love nothing more than to have dinner with people. To come around a table and to talk and to laugh, and people put their phones away and people put their stuff away. And I particularly enjoy it when games are also played during dinner, right? Or when you pull those table talk cards and you start having these wild conversations because there is something holy and sacred that happens around a table. I am a big believer in everybody in our household sits down and eats together at the same time. Because I think that there is something holy and sacred about the work that we do when we sit together at the table and enjoy food. When we can pause in the hecticness of our moment, of our daily lives, and who's going where and what meetings are being had and who's got to get where and do what and what does the evening have for us. It is an opportunity to pause and to breathe and to reconnect. I never understood growing up why my mom was so adamant about sitting at the dining room table and having dinner together, because my sister and I were really excited about getting to eat on TV trays in front of the television, right? And most of the time, my dad agreed with us. So I didn't understand why, for my mom, it became such an important thing for us to have dinner together around the dining room table. And as I got away from that, and as I grew up and went to college and lived on my own, I forgot the magic and the holy and sacred work of sitting together around the table with no other distractions, with nothing else to argue over, with nothing else to zone in on, just the four of us at the table. This then translated into my figuring out what it meant to do mission well, right? So I love to feed people. That's my favorite thing to do. You come to me with any ministry idea that involves feeding people, I am so on board. So when I was in my second appointment and I was serving in Warren County, New Jersey, friends of mine who were members at the Cokesbury United Methodist Church came to me and said, we serve at a soup kitchen in Easton, Pennsylvania, 2 Thursdays a month. And this was a program that was incredible. They commandeered the basement of a church that had a commercial kitchen, and they provided food for the at-risk population every single Thursday night. And they did a worship service first, and then they cooked dinner in the background. And when service was over, they opened up the lines. And this group had no funding. They had no real name. They had no real structure to them at all. They just had a couple of people who were really, really passionate about feeding people, and they invited us to come alongside. So every time we thought something was going to go wrong, somehow God managed to do some holy things and made it happen. So we had a really good partnership with the Wawa in Easton, and every Thursday night someone would stop off at the Wawa, and Wawa has rules about how long their food can sit underneath the heat lamps. So the food is not necessarily bad, but it just, according to their regulations, can no longer be underneath the heat lamps. So they have to throw it out. Don't even get me started about food waste in America. But this group partnered with them, and every Thursday they went to Wawa and they gave them bags and bags of food that would otherwise be thrown out. And we brought them to the families and the guys and the women and the teenagers who came to eat with us on their way out. And when we first started going as a church, my whole group was a little bit standoffish. I am a Martha. I am not a Mary. I like to be in the kitchen. I like to be organizing things. I like to be on the other side of things. You are not going to find me if there are people in my house actively engaging with people, which my mom tells me is a problem, but it's a whole nother thing. So I was really good at the kitchen. And I was really good at telling everybody, here's what we're going to do. Here's what I need you to do. And I ran a really great line. I was really comfortable with serving food. But when it came to the end, when all of the food had been served and all there was left was us to clean up, and then that was over. And all we had to do was wait for the folks who came to eat with us to be done so we could clean up there. All of a sudden, I found us awkwardly hanging around in the kitchen while all of them were out there. And one day, I realized that God was not calling us to sit in the kitchen and talk to each other. God was calling us to go and sit and eat with the folks that came. And so my group started doing that every Thursday that we went. We would sit with our guests and we would talk to them. We had profound and beautiful conversations. We had weird moments that many of us still will call each other about and say, remember when that happened? But we had holy and sacred moments because when you sit at the table with another person, they are your equal. They become not some homeless person who walked in off the streets or some drug addict who doesn't have their finances together enough to be able to pay for food. They become a human being. And then one night, the guys who ran the worship side of it asked me to preach. And it was the first time that they had a woman who was not a Mennonite preach. And then I got to sit and have conversations with folks afterwards. And it was holy and sacred because all of a sudden I was seeing God in everybody else. Where because of my walls about what is uncomfortable for me, talking to strangers, engaging with people I would really rather not engage with, worried about what things those folks carried with them that maybe I wouldn't be equipped to handle. That I was really good of doing what I was comfortable with. I was really good at feeding people, and I was really good at being a server. I was like, hey, what's up? Are you having a great night? We've got this delicious food, right? And I loved that. But I was really afraid to step over the door jamb and sit at the table with people. When I finally got over that, and when my team finally got over that, we had these incredible moments. And my congregants, in the beginning, there was only 2 of them who came with me. Every time we served twice a month. Only 2 of them that came with me. And so we took one car, and it was a really great bonding moment for the 3 of us. But then they would go back to church and they would talk about it. And they would say, we have so much fun. This is such an incredible blessing. Hear all of these great things that we are doing. Hear all of the ways that our lives are being changed. And by the time this group unfortunately wound up getting shut down because of politics in the church, the basement that they commandeered, we had 3 minivans full of people who were showing up, who were making food, and who were sitting at the table. We have this idea sometimes in American Christianity where we as the good Christian folk are the ones who bring God to everybody else, right? How great is it that, the Broadway and Port Colden United Methodists are coming to Easton, Pennsylvania, and we're making food, and look at how great and wonderful we are. And look at how we are bringing God to these people who don't know God. And when we sat around those tables, what happened for us was God was brought to us. Because it was, again, a lesson that God resides with the lost and the last and the least. And the people we would least like to have at our dinner table are the people that God calls to us and where God is already. And so we can't find God if we're not willing to sit at the table. We can't find God unless we are willing to put down all of the distractions and the stuff and the televisions and the TV dinners and sit and look at somebody else's humanity. We can't find God if we are too busy washing dishes and cooking up eggs instead of paying attention to the people who are sitting at the table longing to show us who Jesus is. Over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be really diving into what it means to show up at the table. What it means for God to show up and what it means for us to show up. So what I'm going to invite you to do is to come to the table. Come to the table with all of your stuff, the good and the bad. Come to the table with all of your fears and your anxieties. Come to the table with your big dreams and your hopes and your goals. Come to the table with your wild and weird selves. Come to the table and see the holy and sacred work that is done here. We read this morning from our scripture, from Luke, the tail end of the what we call Walk to Emmaus story. Right? And Jesus is walking, or disciples are walking to figure out what in the world has gone on for them. And Jesus joins them as a third stranger, and they can't see him. And they're talking with this stranger who journeys with them. And Jesus, the stranger, says to the disciples, "So what's going on? What's happening? And the disciples look at him and go, are you the only person in the entirety of Galilee who has no idea what's happened? It would be like if somebody came walking up to you and said, hey, what's going on in the world, huh? And you would be like, are you the only person who has not heard that we're in the middle of a global pandemic? And like California is on fire. And like we have riots and innocent people are being shot and like the whole world is just a mess. Like, have you not been paying attention? Have you been living in a bunker? Like, what are you doing? That is pretty much how the disciples responded to Jesus. Do you have no idea what is going on? And then they began to discuss scripture and they began to talk about what all of these things mean for the coming of Christ, for the Messiah. And then Jesus has dinner with them. And they're surrounded around the table, and they're all face to face, equal with one another. And Jesus lifts the bread overhead and breaks it. And says to his disciples, take and eat. And it is in that moment that their eyes are opened, and all of a sudden they realize that Jesus has been with them all along. Jesus has never left them. And that indeed Christ was risen and made known to them, not in grand cathedrals, not in some super religious state, but at dinner, shared with a stranger. That group that we ate with in Easton, Thanksgiving was coming around, and we knew that many of those people were never going to get Thanksgiving dinner. And if you're a person who really likes food like I do, and if you're also a person who really likes to cook food like I do, and if you're a person who's obsessed with mashed potatoes like I am, when you realize that there are people who are not going to be able to have Thanksgiving the way that you have always been privileged enough to be able to experience Thanksgiving, you want to make it happen. So I came to my churches and I said, let's do Thanksgiving. Let's do the fullness of Thanksgiving for these people that we have been serving alongside every single week. People who we will sit at when you and I sit at our dining room tables on Thanksgiving, will probably be out in the cold. Let's do something. So we got a bunch of volunteers to go pick people up. So we had a sign-up sheet at our dinner event, and we said to them, "Okay, we'll bring you into New Jersey. We have Thanksgiving dinner for you. If you want to come, sign up here. This is where we'll meet you." So we brought 2 minivans from Easton, a minivan from a home that we were also working with for mentally challenged adults, and a van from the motel that we worked very, very closely up the road with. And they all came. There's this mishmash of unlikely outcasts who got together for Thanksgiving dinner. And my church made like 6 turkeys and all of the sides and all of the fixins, and we sat together and we had Thanksgiving dinner. And I will tell you, I've had really good Thanksgiving dinners before. That is my favorite Thanksgiving. Because we were this ragtag group of people, outcasts, people who have been told their whole lives that they don't fit in, many of whom have made their own ways to fit in, sitting around the table eating and feasting. And it didn't matter what level of education we had. It didn't matter who we were or where we came from. God showed up. And so when we broke bread and we gave it to one another, something holy and beautiful and sacred occurred. So come to the table today and every day. Amen.